A neighborhood is where people feel at home in public. That means the benefits of closeness and familiarity, but also a center whose circumference can embrace different kinds of people, even layers of history. That chemistry is being re-examined in a series of conversations on Boston's neighborhoods, including local artists and community leaders. It's being organized by the nonprofit Now and There. We'd like to welcome its executive director, Kate Gilbert. Thank you very much for being with us again, Kate.
Thank you, Chris.
Kate, this sounds a bit encyclopedic. You want to do the whole city practically, but why do this now?
Well, right now, most of us are still at home, and we're very much specifically located in our home within our neighborhood. And our work at Now and There is about connecting across the disconnect, connecting across the silos of our neighborhoods. And it seemed like a natural to turn to Zoom, open up the cameras and start to have conversations from people's living rooms about where they are today in their neighborhood, what they need, and how they want to see their neighborhood in the future.
Well, I imagine a lot of this is how public art can be part of the solution,
Right.
but the problems are pretty serious. We're talking about racial divides, economic divides, people insecure about where they're going to be in the future. So, how,
Food
how could
insecurity. Yeah.
how can public art help with any of that?
It's a good question. I don't think any of us think that public art is going to solve those major issues on a systemic level. But I do believe in the value of art raising up these issues from a place that we can approach them. I always point back to the project we did with Liz Glynn in Open House, where she had, furniture in the style of Louis XIV. Furniture is cast concrete; people knew what to do with it, and then if they dug deeper, they could see that there was a conversation about the Second Gilded Age that was coming.
I want to ask you about the one session you've already had about Boston's West End. This is a case where you had a neighborhood that was pretty much wiped out by urban renewal, and the thing that replaced it was sort of a closed system. And I guess what you're trying to do in Boston right now is have more open systems in neighborhoods. So,
Right.
what was the conversation like about people from the West End?
Well, first we went back to the history of the West End as one of the most diverse neighborhoods in Boston, a very, very small geographic area. But at the time, right before urban renewal, there were something like 14 synagogues and 8 churches, 23 different ethnicities, all of these people living in close proximity of very varying different diversities. And yet it worked well together. And according to Sebastian, who was the president of the West End Museum, it was because everyone had sort of their own space, yet they were all sort of on top of each other in these tenement houses. Fast forward urban renewal, all of those buildings go down in 1 year. And it takes 20 to 30 years to rebuild what we see now. And we were looking at and talking about the Lieberman building and those 3 buildings that were created, or at least the theory was created by Shepley, Bulfinch, Richardson, and Abbott, to ask people to go down one long street, Charles Street, take a left, and then come into an entrance, almost it feels like a mile away, forcing people to go, literally walk one way is so antithetical to anything that we're trying to do today, which is to recognize diversity of lived experiences. You want to talk about ableism, the conversation, and that was just yesterday at the West End, really focused on how to lift up all of the different experiences of people who live in the West End now, and bring them together in spaces. And a lot of the conversation led to community spaces. What are the cultural centers? Where are the places where we're bringing youth together, so they can feel heard and recognized as the individuals they are?
One of the things you're asking people to do in this conversation series is to think of their neighborhood as it's going to be maybe 10 years from now.
Yep.
I get that feeling when I walk through Newby Square, because I mean, what's going to happen here? Why is it important for people to think that way?
Well, first, in the first portion of the series, we were asking people, what does your neighborhood need right now? And the conversations got pretty dark and pretty not positive, let's say. And so we retooled it to think about 10 years out. That feels like a time that people can imagine. It's not yet, space we're riding around in rockets, but it's still the future, and we can present a positive spin on it. It's important for us to think about what we want our future to be right now, because it is a blank canvas. I mean, this pandemic, the racial reckoning, has shown how divided we are, how the inequalities across race, gender, all kinds of socioeconomic. So it's important for us to remember, as individuals, we have that ability to shape our future. I was reminded of the conversation we had in Charlestown. We had the Charlestown Coalition on, and their youth group Turn It Around. Those teens created a peace park by painting rocks and putting them in a space that's owned by, I think it's Mass Highway, or whatever it is now. And they created a space where they felt comfortable going as youth, mostly Black and brown youth, in a neighborhood where they still don't quite feel that comfortable. So it was those individuals thinking about, what would peace look like, turning into some painted rocks, turning into a space where they could gather.
What is it about the power of art to do that? Because it isn't always explicitly about neighborhood history or a particular group of people. It's just something that makes you think differently. What happens after that that's so important?
Well, I think that's up to the individual, as they approach a piece of public art that might spark a new way of thinking. We talk a lot about asking people to come together in space right now, and come together safely in space. Um, I always like it when I'm in a supermarket and it's slow line, and you turn to the people to the side and you start a conversation, and that doesn't happen so much anymore. And so we hope that, coming across a piece like Jose Davila's work up in over by the aquarium, people will connect with someone who they don't know. And I believe strongly in this idea of proximity. If you can get closer to someone who's not like you, whether that's a different race, a different form of able bodiedness, or different intellectual capacity, it's going to help you think more about this idea of public and who we're designing the public for, whether it's a piece of art or a piece of legislation.
Because I mean, when a lot of people think about planning for a neighborhood, especially in a cultural way,
Mhm.
there's one part of them that wants it to be consistent, not a mix of different things. And there are other people who say that, well, they like a mix and they like things that don't normally go together. So how do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah, and I'm experiencing that right now in my neighborhood. There's development going up, and it's through conversation, and that's why we created this series. We make sure in the series that we have a community agreement, that people are coming from their own place. I think the more that we can practice this in a non-contentious space before the developer comes in, before new legislation, the more that we can hear and be empathetic. So yes, I mean, I prefer things that are a little maybe less cookie cutter and more experimental. And I think people find their neighborhoods that match that. So, if you're looking for something that's very sort of traditional, you're going to find yourself in Beacon Hill. And maybe if you're looking something a little more funky, you might go to the West End, sorry, to the Leather District or to Fort Point. And that's what we're exploring, all of these beautiful, unique spaces in Boston.
Well, it occurs to me, you're talking about places where people feel it's pleasant to spend some time, maybe
Mhm.
settle down and not just rush through. Isn't that also good for economic development?
Yes, yes, it is. And I think we also need to make sure that those spaces are accessible to everyone. Um, I think of libraries, for instance, as these very equitable spaces. Um, that a library isn't necessarily driving economic development, but it's caring for those who are most at risk. Thinking of our homeless populations, immigrants coming for ESL, and anyone needing a space of refuge or of knowledge.
And if you want to open up a boutique and make some money, it's good to be near places like that, right?
Yes, Absolutely, where you can have that flow of diversity.
Finally, you should mention if people want to plug into this and take part, especially when it comes to their neighborhood, what's the
Yeah.
best way to figure out how to do that?
They should go to nowandthere.org/asks. We do have a form on our website. We're looking for artists. We're looking for neighborhood leaders and guests to help us look at the next neighborhoods ahead. We're moving on to Hyde Square, West Roxbury, Eggleston Square, Roslindale, a lot of places we haven't covered yet, and we might go back to some. We've gone to Dorchester. It's such a big neighborhood that I think there's areas that we can continue to focus on there. So yeah, check out the website, find us online, let us know why your neighborhood is so special and what we should highlight.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Kate, Gil- Kate Gilbert from Now and There. We'll have more news in just a moment.